So we have day 13 of the Russian invasion. Um, been looking a lot more about the news sources, doing a little bit more research on it. Um, Definitely seems like a humanitarian crisis. It probably is true that Russia only brought fuel for 3 days because they thought the government would fall in 3 days, which is obviously a major fuck up. Now, however, 100% of the Russian forces are actually in Ukraine now. And even though Russia made some huge blunders probably and lost a lot of forces, tanks, I'm sure they will adapt. So from this point forward, it might actually be a harder slog for the Ukrainian resistance forces. They'll probably won't try to take the Kiev directly, but they'll probably try to bomb it and just turn it into rubble completely until the Ukrainians capitulate. What do they want? From my research, is they have four demands. They want Crimea and two more territories, the separatist territories that are on the east, next to Russia, and they want for Ukraine to sign a new, that they can't join NATO or any other pact, like for them to remain neutral. Uh, President Zelensky just rejected that out of hand. Um, it seems at this point who's going to blink first. Um, of course, I can see from their perspective, you don't want an aggressor to capitulate and give anything to their aggressor, because this will encourage more bad, quote unquote, bad behavior from them. But at the same time, if you were to look at, if you believe that, if you were to look at NATO expansion and the 2014 coup that toppled the kind of more pro-friendly Putin pro-friendly government that was friendly to Putin, well, they're going to lose Crimea and lose their port, and then the stuff that I was listening from military experts saying that Russia has very few ports, and this would be very bad for their navy. And I mean, personally, what I think this is just disasters all around. Even, I mean, maybe I'm a pussy, maybe I'm a wimp, but I would be content with Ukraine joining NATO and having all these military forces, you know, um, enemy military forces kind of build up around it, because no matter what, they wouldn't. I mean, just like they're not. North Korea has a few nukes, and they're not going to be invaded just for that reason. So Russia having so many nukes, they would be just too dangerous. They wouldn't. Would they try to foment revolutions and overthrow the government? Possibly, I guess that, but they wouldn't try to establish a no-fly zone over Russia completely. So, um, I'm pretty sure though, if you're concerned about the NATO and the West, they could be dealt with more effectively. Actually, take the war to them economically. Right now, Russia is weak, economically weak. They could modernize like China and start developing all sorts of manufacturing, uh, increase property rights, increase business, increase investments. So if Russia would become an economic powerhouse, that would definitely really put more. You know what I mean? They'll be able to culturally and just militarily like flex more muscles. Um, Paradoxically, it's kind of funny now that all these countries are afraid of Russian invasion, and stepping up NATO spending, but it's like you're kind of seeing that Russia's not doing so well in Ukraine right now. Um, so they have no chance of taking on Britain or Germany or any NATO country. So they're having a hard time taking on a tiny neighbor next to them. Now, I mean, would a like an Egyptian army do any better? Probably not. Or like but they're a second world army. They're not first. They're not a modern first world army. Partly because Russia doesn't even spend that much money on the army, so it's not compared to the U.S. standards. Um, this is pretty. It seems like pretty disastrous, but at the same time, it's hard to get stuff that like get any kind of news that is non-propaganda. You can either look at the Daily Mail or CNN or the New York Post, but that's a very pro-Western propaganda. Then there's some other like some Twitter users that are like from Russians' perspective, so they're kind of pretty biased from one side or another. It's hard to find a like a blog or so we'll develop it with basically they're just reporting, leaving politics out of it. Who's right or who's wrong, or what side you want, whatever. Who's courageous, who whatever. Just show the military activities, just to show what tanks have been lost, just to show what city's been what city's been captured, what cities is resisting, something like that. Because you do have incredibly biased coverage on the American media as far as um, they just show the Russian devastation. I'm sure there is. I'm sure that Russia did lose a ton of tanks, but yeah, if any time Russia is actually advancing and doing well militarily, well then they're going to spin it as like, oh, evil Putin, just crushing, killing civilians, um, and not to be what about is now not to use whataboutism, but what about the time America invaded Iraq or these other Middle Eastern countries, and how pro gun ho their media was, even though I mean technically America's media is not supposed to be controlled by the government, unlike Russia. For Russian media, you can clearly see why they're pro Russian advancement or military aggression or whatever. But I mean, apparently we have an independent media, but the aren't that there weren't. I mean, aside from like libertarian sources, there aren't that many uh, websites that actually criticized the war or showed that many heavy casualties, or called for kind of some kind of American boycotts, or maybe before my time, maybe around the Vietnam War era. Yeah, day 13 update. Let's see what happens next.